Divorced mom adopted old German Shepherd, then it led her to something shocking. A divorced mom thought she was just rescuing a lonely old dog from the pier. But the moment he stepped into her life, everything changed. This wasn't just any dog, he kept dragging her to hidden places, as if guarding a secret too big to ignore. First, an old dog tag buried in the sand, then a box of love letters hidden beneath the pier. Letters from a soldier who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a story of forbidden love and heartbreaking silence. Why has this dog waited for decades on the edge of the sea? And what secret from the past will he force her to uncover, one that could either heal generations or destroy the only chance she has at family? Let me know in the comments which city or country you're listening from. If you like stories that connect us, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the weathered boardwalk as Gianna Matthews dragged her wheeled suitcase toward the small rental cottage that would be her new home. At 52, she never imagined she'd be starting over, but here she was. Salt air filled her lungs, sharp, clean, and somehow both bitter and sweet, like the circumstances that had brought her to this seaside town. The cottage stood at the end of Pearl Street, its faded blue paint and white trim giving it a worn but welcoming appearance. Gianna fumbled with the key the rental agent had given her, listening to the distant cry of seagulls and the rhythmic wash of waves against the shore. Inside, the cottage smelled of lemon cleaning solution and old wood. She walked through each small room, the compact kitchen with its dated appliances, the living room with its warm but comfortable furniture, and the bedroom where afternoon light filtered through gauzy curtains. It wasn't much, but it was hers, at least for now. After unpacking only the essentials, Gianna felt the walls of the centered cottage closing in. The silence was too loud, filled with thoughts she wasn't ready to face. She needed air, needed movement. Slipping on her walking shoes, she headed toward the beach. The wooden planks of the boardwalk creaked beneath her feet as she made her way toward the pier. The evening air had grown cooler, and she wrapped her light cardigan tighter around herself. A few tourists lingered on the beach, collecting shells or taking photos of the sunset, but the pier itself was nearly empty. That's when she saw him. At the very end of the pier sat a German Shepherd, his fur ragged and salt-stained, his pose so still he might have been carved from stone. The dog's gaze was fixed on the horizon, unwavering, as if he were waiting for something or someone to emerge from where the sky met the sea. "Oh honey," Gianna whispered to herself, her heart twisting at the sight. "Are you lost?" She took a few steps closer, but before she could approach further, a voice called out from behind her. "I wouldn't bother with that one, dear." Gianna turned to find an older woman wearing an apron from the nearby Sandy's Cafe, her gray hair tucked beneath a faded bandana. "That dog's been here longer than most of the shops on this strip," the woman continued, gesturing toward the row of small businesses lining the boardwalk. "Name's Martha, by the way. You must be the one who rented the Peterson cottage." "News travels fast," Gianna said with a small smile. "I'm Gianna Matthews." "Small town," Martha shrugged. "Come on over to the cafe. You look like you could use a cup of coffee, and I'll fill you in on our local celebrity." The cafe was warm and smelled of coffee and fresh-baked muffins. A bell tinkled as they entered, and several heads turned to study the newcomer. Martha led Gianna to a corner booth where they could see the pier through the wide front window. "That dog's become something of a legend around here," Martha explained, pouring coffee into a chipped blue mug. "Been sitting at that same spot, day after day, for years now. Folks have tried to take him in, but he won't have it. Animal control's been out dozens of times, but somehow he always manages to slip away." An elderly man at the counter turned around, adding to the conversation. "My grandson tried leaving food for him once. Won't touch anything anyone brings him. Gets his own food somehow, though. Nobody knows where he goes when he's not on that pier. Some say he belongs to a fisherman who never came back," added a woman with steel gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "Others think he's waiting for his owner to return from the war, though he'd have to be ancient if that were true." "War?" Gianna asked, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee mug. "Vietnam. World War II. Depends on who's telling the story," Martha said with a wave of her hand. "Though if you ask me, those are just tales people like to tell tourists. Truth is, nobody knows where he came from, or what he's waiting for. Bad luck to try and help him, the elderly man added solemnly. Jenny Peters tried to rescue him last summer. Next day, her boat capsized, could have drowned if the Coast Guard hadn't been nearby. Gianna looked back out the window at the solitary figure on the pier. The sun had nearly set now, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. The dog's silhouette remained unchanged, a dark sentinel against the dying light. "Don't go getting any ideas," Martha warned, noting Gianna's expression. "That dog's got his own purpose, whatever it might be. Best to leave him to it." Later that night, in her newly made bed, Gianna listened to the distant sound of waves and the occasional cry of nightbirds. Sleep came fitfully, and when it did, she dreamed. In her dream, she stood on the pier under a full moon. The German Shepherd was there, but he wasn't alone. A shadowy figure stood beside him, hand resting on the dog's head. Both seemed to be waiting, watching the horizon with endless patience. Gianna tried to call out, to ask who they were waiting for, but no sound came from her throat. The figure turned slightly, as if about to reveal its face. She woke with a start, early morning light streaming through her windows. The dream clung to her like cobwebs, leaving her with an inexplicable sense of longing and loss. After a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, Gianna found herself drawn back to the pier. The morning was clear and bright, with only a few wispy clouds scattered across the sky. She wasn't surprised to see the dog was already there, in the exact same spot as the evening before. His fur looked even more weathered in the morning light, gray threading through what must have once been rich, brown and black. His ears were alert, his posture straight and dignified despite his obvious age and condition. Whatever he was watching for, his vigil remained unbroken. Gianna stood several yards away, studying him. There was something both noble and heartbreaking about his dedication, about the way he held himself with such unwavering purpose. She recognized something in him, perhaps the same kind of loss and longing that had brought her to this place, seeking a new beginning. "What are you waiting for?" she whispered, her words carried away by the morning breeze. The dog's ears twitched slightly, but his gaze remained fixed on the horizon, keeping his silent watch over the endless sea. The early morning mist rolled in from the ocean like a soft blanket, wrapping the shoreline in its gentle embrace. Gianna stood at her kitchen window, watching the ethereal scene while her coffee brewed. The weathered pier stretched out into the gray waters, and even through the fog, she could make out Rex's familiar silhouette at its far end. Her hand brushed against the paper bag on her counter, containing the remains of last night's roasted chicken and a fresh bread roll from the local bakery. She hadn't planned on feeding the pier dog, but something about his unwavering vigil touched her heart. "This is probably silly," she muttered to herself, pulling on a warm sweater. The morning air held a distinct chill, and the moisture from the mist clung to her skin as she made her way down the wooden walkway toward the beach. The boards of the pier creaked beneath her feet as she walked, each step measured and careful. The fog muffled the usual morning sounds, creating an almost otherworldly atmosphere. Even the crying of the seagulls seemed distant and dreamlike. As she approached Rex, his ears twitched, acknowledging her presence, though his eyes remained fixed on the horizon. Up close, she could see the silver threading through his muzzle, the way his coat had grown patchy in places. Despite his weathered appearance, he held himself with a quiet dignity that touched something deep within her. "Good morning," Gianna said softly, keeping her voice gentle and even. "I brought you something." She settled down slowly, leaving several feet between them. The wooden planks felt damp beneath her, but she didn't mind. From the paper bag, she pulled out the chicken and tore off a small piece. "I know they say you won't take food from anyone," she continued, placing the morsel halfway between them. "But maybe we could share breakfast?" Rex's nose twitched, and for the first time since she'd arrived in town, he turned his head to look at her. His eyes were a deep amber, holding a wisdom that seemed almost human. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense and searching. Then, to her amazement, he stood and took 3 careful steps toward her. His movements were stiff, showing his age, but still graceful. He sniffed the offered chicken, and with gentle care, took it from the pier's surface. Gianna's heart swelled. "There's more if you'd like," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Over the next half hour, they shared the chicken and bread in companionable silence. Each time, Rex would wait patiently as she placed a piece between them, never rushing, never demanding. It felt less like feeding a stray and more like sharing a meal with a friend. As the last piece of chicken disappeared, Gianna found herself talking to him, telling him about her divorce, her decision to move to this small coastal town, her hopes of starting fresh. Rex listened with those intelligent eyes, occasionally tilting his head as if considering her words. "May I?" she asked, slowly extending her hand. Rex watched her movement but didn't retreat. Carefully, so carefully, she let her fingers brush against his fur. It was coarse and matted in places, but underneath she could feel the warmth of him, solid and real. He leaned slightly into her touch, and tears pricked at her eyes. Later that morning, Gianna found herself at the local animal shelter, a small building with peeling blue paint and a hand-lettered sign. Inside, a young woman named Sarah was organizing files behind a desk covered in cat toys. The pier dog? Sarah's eyebrows shot up when Gianna explained her morning encounter. "You actually got to touch him. Is that unusual?" Gianna asked, though she already knew the answer. Sarah pulled out a thick folder. "We've been trying to help that dog for years. Every time someone manages to bring him in, he finds a way to escape. It's almost supernatural how he does it. Through locked doors, over 6-foot fences, he always ends up back at that pier." She spread out several photos showing Rex in various locations around town. "We've had at least 12 different families try to adopt him. None of them could keep him. He's not aggressive or destructive, he just leaves. Always goes back to his spot. But he let me touch him," Gianna said softly. "He shared my breakfast." Sarah studied her thoughtfully. "That's different. In all these years, I've never heard of him accepting food from anyone." "I'd like to adopt him," Gianna found herself saying, surprising even herself. "Mrs. Matthews, I don't think." "Please," Gianna interrupted. "Something's different this time. I can feel it, and even if he does go back to the pier, at least let me try to care for him. Get him proper food, medical care." Sarah hesitated, then pulled out a stack of forms. "It's against my better judgment, but there's something about the way you describe your interaction with him. Just don't be disappointed if—" "I understand," Gianna said, already reaching for the papers. As she filled them out, she could feel Sarah watching her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "What will you call him?" Sarah asked as Gianna signed the last form. "Rex." Gianna answered without hesitation. "He looks like a Rex." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Gianna bought dog food, bowls, a bed, and other supplies, though something told her Rex wouldn't be interested in the squeaky toys she impulsively added to her cart. She set everything up in her cottage, trying not to hope too much, trying to prepare herself for disappointment. As evening approached, she walked back to the pier. Rex was there, as always, but this time when she called his name, he stood and walked toward her. Together, they made their way back to the cottage, his pace unhurried but steady beside her. That night, after showing Rex around the cottage and setting out food and water, Gianna prepared for bed with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Would he still be there in the morning? Or would she wake to find him gone, back at his eternal vigil on the pier? She had just settled under the covers when she heard the soft click of nails on hardwood. Rex appeared in her doorway, his outline visible in the moonlight streaming through her window. With deliberate steps, he crossed the room and curled up at the foot of her bed. Gianna's heart filled with an unexpected warmth. She reached down to touch his fur, and he sighed contentedly. "I guess I'm not alone anymore," she whispered into the darkness. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the beach as Gianna walked with Rex along the shoreline. The gentle rhythm of waves provided a soothing backdrop to their first real outing together. She had bought him a blue collar and matching leash that morning, though she barely needed it. Rex stayed close, matching her pace perfectly. "You're quite the gentleman," Gianna said, smiling as Rex navigated around a piece of driftwood without pulling on the leash. His ears perked up at her voice, and she could have sworn he looked pleased. The beach stretched empty before them, most tourists gone now that summer had ended. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries carried on the salt-laden breeze. Rex seemed to know exactly where he wanted to go, leading her past the pier and toward a series of weathered dunes that rose like sleeping giants from the sand. As they approached a particular sandbank beneath the dunes, Rex's demeanor changed. His nose dropped to the ground, and he began pulling with purpose, not aggressively, but with clear intent. Gianna lengthened her stride to keep up. "What is it, boy? What have you found?" Rex stopped at a spot that looked no different from the surrounding sand. Without warning, he began to dig, his powerful paws throwing sand in efficient arcs behind him. The intensity of his effort surprised Gianna. "Hey, slow down," she called. But Rex continued his frantic digging. Within minutes, he had created a sizable hole in the packed sand. Gianna knelt beside him, curiosity overwhelming her initial concern. The sun glinted off something metallic in the disturbed sand. Reaching down, she brushed away the remaining grains to reveal a chain with a metal tag attached. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted it from its sandy bed. The tag was rusted, but still solid. Gianna turned it over in her hands, using her thumb to carefully clear away decades of corrosion. Numbers and letters gradually emerged under her touch. It was a military dog tag, she realized, dating back to World War II. "How did you know this was here?" she wondered aloud, looking at Rex. He sat beside her, watching intently as she examined the tag. The name was barely legible, but she could make out James H. Sullivan stamped into the metal. A chill ran through her despite the warm afternoon Sunday. This wasn't just a piece of metal, it was someone's identity, someone's story buried in the sand. Rex whined softly, nudging her hand with his nose. "Okay, boy, let's head back. I think we've had enough excitement for one day." Later that evening, Gianna decided to treat herself to dinner at the local seafood restaurant, the Salty Dog. Rex seemed content to stay home, curled up in his new bed, though she suspected he'd be waiting by the pier when she returned. The restaurant was busy for a weekday, filled with the murmur of conversation and the clink of cutlery. Gianna chose a seat at the bar, ordering the fresh catch of the day. While waiting for her food, she found herself turning the dog tag over in her pocket, its edges now smooth from her constant touching. "First time in town?" the bartender asked as he set down her glass of white wine. "Just moved in, actually, near the pier." "Ah, you're the one who took in that old dog," he said, recognition lighting his features. "Brave of you." Gianna smiled, warming to the conversation. "He's been wonderful, actually. We had quite an interesting walk today." She pulled out the dog tag, setting it on the bar. "He even helped me find this buried in the sand." The clatter of a glass hitting the floor made her jump. At the end of the bar, an old fisherman in a weathered cap stared at the tag, his face suddenly ashen. He set down his half-finished beer and walked over, moving with deliberate slowness. "Where'd you find that?" he demanded, his voice gruff. "Under the dunes, past the pier," Gianna answered, taken aback by his intensity. "My dog dug it up." The old fisherman, Mr. Doran, she heard someone call him, leaned closer, his eyes fixed on the tag. "Some things are better left buried," he said quietly, but with unmistakable warning in his tone. "Don't go stirring up old ghosts, miss. This town's got enough of them already." Before Gianna could respond, he turned and walked out, leaving his unfinished beer on the bar. The other patrons quickly returned to their conversations, but something had changed in the atmosphere, like a cloud passing over the Sunday. "Don't mind old Doran," the bartender said, though his casual tone seemed forced. "He's got his moods." Gianna barely tasted the rest of her dinner, her thoughts consumed by the dog tag and the fisherman's strange reaction. The walk home seemed longer than usual, every shadow deeper than before. Rex was waiting for her when she returned, not at the pier as she'd expected, but sitting patiently by her front door. Inside, she switched on the kitchen lights and sat at the table, placing the dog tag in front of her. Rex settled nearby, his eyes fixed on her with that same intense gaze she'd noticed when they first met. "What secrets are you keeping, boy?" she whispered, running her finger over the stamped letters of a long-dead soldier's name. Rex's only response was to lay his head on his paws, his eyes never leaving her face. The tag caught the kitchen light, its worn surface holding questions Gianna wasn't sure she wanted answered. Yet something about Mr. Doran's reaction, about Rex's deliberate discovery of the tag, told her she was already part of whatever story lay buried beneath the sand. The evening shadows stretched long across Gianna's living room as she tried to focus on her book. Rex paced restlessly by the front door, his nails clicking against the hardwood floors. She glanced up, noticing his unusual agitation. "What's wrong, boy?" she asked, marking her page. "Need to go out?" Rex barked sharply, something he rarely did, and scratched at the door. Gianna checked her watch, 8:30 in the rough evening. The sun had already set, leaving only a faint purple glow on the horizon. "It's pretty late for a walk," she said, but Rex wouldn't settle. He kept moving between her and the door, whining with increasing urgency. His behavior was so unlike his usual calm demeanor that she felt a flutter of concern in her chest. Okay, she relented, reaching for her jacket and flashlight. But just a quick one. The moment she opened the door, Rex bounded out into the darkness, pausing only to make sure she followed. The evening air carried a damp chill, and Gianna pulled her jacket closer as they made their way down the empty street. Instead of heading toward their usual walking route, Rex led her straight to the pier. The wooden structure loomed dark against the night sky, creaking softly with each wave that rolled beneath it. The sound of the ocean seemed louder after dark, more mysterious somehow. "Rex, what are we doing out here?" Gianna whispered, her voice nearly lost in the rhythmic slap of water against wood. The German shepherd ignored her question, padding confidently through the darkness toward the beach access point beside the pier. His gray form was barely visible in the dim light, but she could hear his paws crunching in the sand ahead of her. Following Rex beneath the pier sent a shiver down Gianna's spine. The space felt different at night, more enclosed, almost tunnel-like. The waves echoed hollowly against the wooden pilings, and she had to duck to avoid the cross beams overhead. Her flashlight beam bounced off the wet sand, creating eerie shadows that danced between the wooden posts. Rex stopped suddenly, his nose working the air. He began pawing at a pile of driftwood, pieces of weathered lumber that had collected against one of the larger pilings. Gianna aimed her flashlight at the spot, expecting to find perhaps a trapped animal or something that had washed up with the tide. Instead, the beam revealed something that made her catch her breath. Behind the scattered driftwood, partially hidden by sand and shadows, was what appeared to be an opening, a narrow tunnel entrance reinforced with old timber. "Oh my God," she breathed, crouching down for a better look. The tunnel mouth was small, maybe 3 feet high, but it seemed solid despite its age. The wood framing the entrance was dark with age and salt water, but still intact. Rex whined softly, nudging her arm with his nose. The message was clear. This was what he wanted her to find. Gianna hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. The sensible thing would be to leave, to come back in daylight. But something about Rex's urgency, about the way he had insisted on bringing her here tonight specifically, made her reach for her flashlight instead. "I must be crazy," she muttered, getting down on her hands and knees. The sand was cold and damp through her jeans as she crawled forward into the narrow space. The beam of her flashlight revealed rough wooden walls, blackened with age but still holding back the sand. The tunnel extended about 15 feet, sloping slightly upward. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, and Gianna could hear the muffled boom of waves overhead. The air smelled of salt and old wood, with an underlying mustiness that spoke of decades undisturbed. Near the end of the tunnel, her flashlight caught something metallic. A box, roughly the size of a shoe box, sat wedged against the tunnel wall. It was made of steel, green with corrosion but still sealed tight. Gianna's hands trembled as she reached for it. The box was heavier than she expected, and she had to awkward shuffle backward through the tunnel with it tucked under one arm. Rex waited patiently at the entrance, his tail wagging when she emerged. "Whatever this is," she told him, brushing sand from her clothes, "you obviously wanted me to find it." The walk home seemed to take forever. The box felt like it was burning against her side, its weight a constant reminder of taking to meeting the payan, whatever secrets it might contain. Rex stayed close, occasionally looking up at her as if to make sure she was still carrying their discovery. Back in her cottage, Gianna placed the box carefully on her dining room table. She took a moment to change out of her sand-covered clothes and make a cup of tea, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Rex settled into his usual spot nearby, watching intently as she finally sat down to examine their find. The box's latch was corroded shut, but careful work with a butter knife eventually broke it free. Gianna held her breath as she lifted the lid, not sure what to expect. Inside, protected from the elements by the tight seal, lay a bundle of papers carefully wrapped in what appeared to be an old oilskin cloth. Her hands shook slightly as she unwrapped the package. The papers were letters, dozens of them, the paper yellowed but still intact. The first one was dated June 15, 1943. "My dearest Hannah," Gianna read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know these letters may never reach you, but I have to believe that someday, somehow, we'll find a way back to each other." The signature at the bottom made her gasp. James H. Sullivan, the same name that was stamped on the dog tag Rex had found days earlier. But it was the next letter that made her heart truly skip a beat. It was written in careful English, clearly by someone for whom it wasn't their first language. "Leapster James, I risk everything to write these words, but my heart gives me no choice. The war separates us, but it cannot separate my thoughts from you." It was signed simply Hannah, with a small heart drawn beside the name. Gianna sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by what she held in her hands. These weren't just old letters, they were a secret romance, a love story between an American soldier and a German woman, written in the midst of World War II, when such a relationship would have been forbidden. Rex rested his head on her knee, his brown eyes full of understanding. Somehow, he had known exactly where to find this piece of the past, just as he had known where to dig up the dog tag. Gianna reached down to scratch behind his ears, her other hand still resting on the stack of letters. "You're full of surprises, aren't you, boy?" she whispered. Rex's tail thumped against the floor in response, and Gianna turned back to the letters, knowing she wouldn't be getting any sleep tonight. The dining room lamp cast a warm glow over the table, as she carefully began to read through the correspondence, each letter revealing more of a love story that had somehow found its way through one of history's darkest chapters. Golden morning light spilled through the cottage windows, casting warm patches across Gianna's dining room table. She had barely slept, too excited by her discovery to do more than doze fitfully. Now, with a fresh cup of coffee warming her hands, she carefully spread the letters out in chronological order. Rex lay at her feet, his chin resting on his paws, watching her with those knowing brown eyes. The old German shepherd hadn't left her side since they'd found the box, as if he understood the importance of their discovery. "Let's see what story these tell, shall we?" Gianna said softly, picking up the first letter. The paper was delicate, and she handled it with reverence as she began to read aloud. "June 15th, 1943. My dearest Hannah, the war makes everything uncertain, but my feelings for you remain constant as the North Star." As Gianna read, James Sullivan's words painted a vivid picture. He was a young American soldier stationed near the coast, working at a military hospital. Hannah had arrived as a refugee, fleeing the horror of what was happening in her homeland. She worked as a nurse's aide, helping care for wounded soldiers. Their love had bloomed in quiet moments, shared glances across hospital wards, whispered conversations in supply closets, brief meetings in the garden where Hannah grew herbs for medicine. James wrote about her gentle hands, her quiet strength, the way she hummed German lullabies to comfort dying soldiers. Hannah's letters in return were full of both hope and fear. Her English improved with each one, but her emotions needed no translation. She wrote about her terror of being discovered, of being labeled a spy or worse. Yet she couldn't stop herself from loving James, even knowing the danger it put them both in. "My heart speaks a language that knows no borders," she wrote in one letter. "When I am with you, I forget that we are supposed to be enemies. I see only the man who brings me wildflowers and makes me believe in tomorrow." Gianna wiped tears from her eyes as she read their plans for escape. James had arranged passage on a fishing boat, planning to take Hannah to Canada, where they could marry legally. They would meet at the pier at midnight, on August 12, 1944, but the last letter in the collection was from Hannah, dated August 13th. The paper was warped with what could only have been tears. "My beloved James, where are you? I waited all night. The boat came and went, but you never appeared. Has something happened? Are you hurt? Please, If you receive this, find a way to let me know you are alive." Rex whined softly as Gianna's voice broke. She reached down to stroke his fur, finding comfort in his solid presence. "These need to go to someone who understands the town's history," she said. Rex's ears perked up, and he rose to his feet, tail wagging as if he knew exactly where they should go. The town historian's office was housed in an old Victorian building near the library. Mr. Callahan, a retired professor with wire-rimmed glasses and a bow tie, looked up from his desk as Gianna entered, Rex following close behind. Well, he said, eyebrows rising at the sight of the German Shepherd. "That's quite remarkable. That dog hasn't come inside a German building in all the years I've known about him." "You know about Rex?" Gianna asked, setting the box of letters on his desk. "Everyone knows about the pier dog," Mr. Callahan said, adjusting his glasses. "He's been a fixture here longer than most can remember. Though I must say, he looks different with you. More purposeful, somehow." When Gianna explained her discovery, the historian's eyes lit up with excitement. He handled each letter with careful reverence, making small sounds of interest as he read. "This is extraordinary," he said finally, looking up at Gianna. "You know, there have always been whispers about a German woman who appeared in town shortly after the war ended. She lived in a cottage near the pier, kept to herself mostly. The older folks said she would walk to the pier every evening at sunset, rain or shine." He shuffled through some files, pulling out a yellow newspaper clipping. Here, this was from 1946. A small notice about a woman named Hannah Halberg opening a small clinic for the fishing families. She was known for her healing touch, especially with children. "What happened to her?" Gianna asked, leaning forward. Mr. Callahan's expression grew somber. "She passed away in 1987. Never married. The interesting thing is, she left everything she had to establish a fund for maintaining the pier. Stipulated that it must always remain open to the public, day or night." "And James Sullivan? Did you find anything about what happened to him?" The historian shook his head. "That's where things get murky. There are no records of his death, no transfer orders, nothing. It's as if he simply vanished. During wartime, that wasn't uncommon, but..." He trailed off, studying Rex thoughtfully. "What is it?" Gianna prompted. "Well, it's probably nothing, but..." Hannah was known for keeping German shepherds, always just one at a time, always rescued. The last one she had was said to be particularly protective of the pier. Some folks said it would sit there for hours, just like this fellow here. Rex's tail thumped against the floor, and his eyes never left the historian's face. "The thing about small towns," Mr. Callahan continued, "is that the real stories often get buried under years of gossip and speculation. People don't like to talk about certain things, like a German woman during wartime, or soldiers who disappear. But these letters," he gestured to the box, "these tell the truth of it. A love story that got caught in the machinery of war." The sun was setting by the time Gianna left the historian's office. The box of letters clutched tightly to her chest. The evening air was cool, and the sky was painted in shades of purple and orange. Rex trotted beside her, his posture alert, ears forward as if listening for something in the gathering darkness. Gianna couldn't shake the image of Hannah, waiting alone on the pier that August night, watching hope fade with the dawn. Had she spent the rest of her life wondering what had happened to James? Is that why she'd wanted the pier preserved? Because it was the last place she'd had hope of seeing him again? Rex pressed closer to her side as they walked, as if sensing her emotional turmoil. His presence was reassuring, solid, real. Whatever mysteries these letters held, whatever ghosts haunted the pier, she wasn't facing them alone. The letters seemed heavier now, weighted with the knowledge of their tragic ending. Yet something about them felt unfinished, as if their story wasn't quite over. As twilight deepened around them, Gianna held the box closer, protecting these precious pieces of the past that Rex had led her to discover. Morning sunlight filtered through the coastal fog as Gianna followed Rex along an overgrown path leading away from the shore. The German shepherd moved with purpose, pausing occasionally to ensure she kept pace. His ears were alert, tail straight, as if following a trail only he could sense. "Where are we going, boy?" Gianna asked, pushing aside tall reeds that brushed against her jacket. The ground beneath her feet grew softer, marshy, and she was glad she'd worn her rubber boots. Rex led her deeper inland, where the maritime forest grew thick with pine and scrub oak. The sound of waves grew distant, replaced by the rustling of leaves and occasional bird calls. The dog stopped suddenly, his nose twitching as he turned toward a dense wall of vegetation. Gianna might have missed it entirely if Rex hadn't guided her there. A weathered boathouse, its wooden walls gray with age, almost completely hidden behind a curtain of overgrown reeds and vines. Heavy boards had been nailed across the windows and door, though one board hung loose near the bottom, creating a gap just large enough for someone to squeeze through. "I don't think we're supposed to be here," Gianna murmured, but Rex was already pushing his way through the gap. After a moment's hesitation, she followed, having to bend almost double to make it through the opening. The interior was dim and musty. Gianna pulled out her phone, switching on its flashlight. The beam cut through decades of dust, revealing bare wooden walls and a dirt floor. At first glance, it looked abandoned, empty, but Rex went straight to a corner partially hidden behind old fishing nets. There, tucked against the wall, Gianna found evidence of long-ago habitation. Several rusty tin cans were stacked neatly, their labels long since faded. A moldering blanket lay folded beneath them, and beside it, something that made her heart skip, a leather-bound book, its pages warped with moisture but still intact. Settling cross-legged on the floor, Gianna carefully opened the journal. The pages crackled beneath her fingers, filled with cramped handwriting and faded ink. The English was broken, hesitant, as if written by someone still learning the language. August 15, 1945. She read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "The war is over in Europe, but I cannot go home. There is no home left. Hannah says she will help me stay hidden until it is safe. I am ashamed to hide like a coward, but more ashamed to face my brothers in arms. They would not understand why I chose love over duty." Rex settled beside her, his warm bulk pressing against her leg as she turned the pages carefully. August 20, 1945. The town whispers about Hannah. They suspect she helps the enemy. I hear their words when she brings food, German whore, they call her. My brave, beautiful Hannah who risks everything for me. I should leave, spare her this shame, but I am too weak, too in love. Gianna's throat tightened as she read on. September 3, 1945. Someone knows. I saw lights near the boathouse last night. Hannah says we must be patient, wait for papers she has arranged. But I see the way some men watch the pier, watch her house. Do they know I am here? Would they betray us to prove their patriotism? The entries grew more desperate, more paranoid. The last one was dated September 10, 1945, the writing almost illegible. They are coming. I hear them. Hannah, forgive me. I should have been stronger. I should have. The entry ended there, mid-sentence. Gianna sat back, her mind racing. The old fisherman's warning about stirring up ghosts took on new meaning. Had the townspeople discovered James's hiding place? Had they taken matters into their own hands, driven by post-war anger and suspicion? The boathouse suddenly felt colder, more oppressive. Dust motes danced in her phone's beam, and shadows seemed to shift in the corners. She carefully placed the journal in her bag, along with one of the old ration tins as evidence of James's presence here. As she straightened up, a board creaked somewhere in the darkness. Rex's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The sound raised the hair on the back of Gianna's neck. It wasn't his usual protective growl, but something deeper, more primal. "Time to go," she whispered, moving toward the exit. Rex backed out after her, still growling, his eyes fixed on the shadows within the boathouse. Even after they emerged into the morning light, he kept glancing back, hackles raised, as if something lingered there in the darkness, something only he could sense. Gianna looked back one last time at the weathered structure. What had happened here in those final days of summer, 1945? What secrets did these walls still hold? The boathouse stood silent, offering no answers, its boards and vines guarding decades-old mysteries that Rex seemed determined to help her uncover. Sunlight streamed through Gianna's kitchen window the next morning, warming the scattered pieces of evidence on her table. The dog tag, the letters, And now the journal from the boathouse. She stirred her coffee absently, lost in thought. Rex lay nearby, his chin resting on his paws, watching her with those knowing eyes. "What should I do?" she asked aloud. The logical thing would be to take everything to the police or perhaps the town historical society. But something held her back, a nagging feeling that this story wasn't hers to expose. A movement caught her eye through the window. Her neighbor, Mrs. Halberg, was in her garden as usual, carefully tending to her roses. The elderly woman had been nothing but kind since Gianna moved in, often sharing fresh-baked cookies or offering gardening advice. Something about her quiet dignity had always drawn Gianna's curiosity. "Come on, Rex," Gianna said, making a decision. "Let's pay Mrs. Halberg a visit." The old German shepherd rose immediately, tail wagging. He had always shown an unusual interest in Mrs. Halberg's house, often pausing to sniff around her fence during their walks. Gianna found Mrs. Halberg kneeling beside her rose bushes, wearing faded gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed sun hat. The older woman looked up at their approach, her weathered face crinkling into a warm smile. "Good morning, Gianna," she said, carefully pushing herself to her feet. "And hello to you too, Rex." The dog wagged his tail, moving closer than he usually did with strangers. "I was wondering," Gianna began, "if you might have time for a cup of tea." Mrs. Halberg's eyes sparkled. "There's always time for tea. Come in, come in." She led the way into her cottage, a cozy space filled with old photographs and hand-crocheted doilies. The furniture was well worn but immaculately kept, speaking of a lifetime of careful preservation. While Mrs. Halberg prepared the tea, Gianna's attention was drawn to a black and white photograph on the mantel. It showed a young woman with striking features, standing near the pier. Something about her expression, both hopeful and haunted, made Gianna's heart skip. "That's my mother," Mrs. Halberg said quietly, setting down a tray with tea and cookies. "Hannah. She came here after the war." Gianna's hands trembled slightly as she accepted her teacup. "She was German?" Mrs. Halberg nodded slowly, settling into her armchair. Rex positioned himself between them, his eyes never leaving Mrs. Halberg's face. "She rarely spoke of those days," the older woman said. "The war left deep wounds in many hearts. It must have been difficult for her." Gianna ventured carefully. "Coming to America then?" A shadow passed across Mrs. Halberg's face. "There were complications. People weren't always kind to German immigrants, even after the war. My mother." She paused, her hands tightening around her teacup. "She carried such sadness. Sometimes I'd find her at the pier, staring out at the water for hours. When I'd ask why, she'd just say, 'Some questions are better left unanswered, Liebchen.'" Rex whined softly, pressing his head against Mrs. Halberg's knee. She absently stroked his fur, lost in memory. "Did she ever tell you why she came here specifically?" Gianna asked gently. Mrs. Halberg's eyes grew distant. "She would say only that love brought her here. But it was the kind of love that hurt to remember." She straightened suddenly, as if catching herself. "But that's all in the past now. More tea, dear?" Gianna recognized the wall going up, the same kind she'd built around her own painful memories of divorce. She didn't press further, but as she left Mrs. Halberg's house an hour later, her mind was spinning with connections she couldn't quite grasp. That evening, after a dinner she barely tasted, Gianna found herself drawn back to the boathouse. This time, she brought a proper flashlight and a blanket to sit on. Rex followed without hesitation, taking up his now familiar position as guardian while she settled down with the journal. The later entries revealed a man torn apart by impossible choices. James wrote about his family back home, a wife he'd married too young, parents who'd sacrificed everything to give him an education. They'd been so proud when he enlisted, seeing him as their hometown hero. October 1st, 1945, Gianna read aloud, her voice barely a whisper in the musty darkness. "I cannot bear the shame of what I've done. To abandon my post, betray my country's trust, break my marriage vows, all for love. Hannah deserves better than a coward who hides in shadows. My presence here puts her in danger every day. There is only one way to free her from this burden. The next entry was dated October 3rd. The fishing boat is ready. When the storm comes tomorrow, I will take it out. They will find it capsized, assume I drowned trying to escape justice. Hannah will be safe then. She can live free of suspicion, free of me. Perhaps someday she will forgive me for choosing this way out. Gianna's hand shook as she turned to the final page. The writing was rushed, urgent. My dearest Hannah, if you find this, know that every moment with you is worth all the pain. I'd rather die with the memory of true love than live a lie. Forgive me for not being strong enough to face the consequences of our love. You deserve so much more than a man who runs from his choices. I will love you until the sea claims me. The last words blurred as tears filled Gianna's eyes. She pressed the journal to her chest, feeling the weight of James's final choice. He left her behind, she whispered into the darkness. Rex's warm nose pressed against her hand, his brown eyes full of understanding. He nudged her gently, as if saying they weren't done yet. There was more to uncover, more healing to be done. The truth settled over Gianna like a heavy blanket. James hadn't been murdered by vengeful townspeople. He had chosen to disappear, believing his death would free Hannah from scandal and suspicion. But had it? The sadness Mrs. Halberg described in her mother suggested otherwise. Some wounds, Gianna realized, echoed through generations, shaping lives in ways the original players could never have imagined. Rex nudged her hand again, more insistently this time. Looking into his wise old eyes, Gianna felt certain he was somehow connected to all of this, not just a random stray, but a guardian of memories, leading her toward understanding piece by piece. Okay, boy, she whispered. Show me what comes next. Morning light filtered through the boathouse's weathered boards, casting strips of gold across the dusty floor. Gianna had returned at first light, drawn by an inexplicable urgency. Rex paced beside her, his nails clicking against the wooden planks. She watched as the old German shepherd moved with deliberate purpose, sniffing intently at a specific spot near the corner. His paws began scratching at the floorboards, throwing splinters of wood in every direction. What is it, boy? Gianna knelt beside him, running her hands over the rough surface. The board felt looser than its neighbors, and when she pressed down, one end lifted slightly. Stand back, Rex. Using a rusty crowbar she'd found hanging on the wall, Gianna worked the tool under the edge of the plank. The wood groaned in protest as she applied pressure, decades of grime crackling, as the nails slowly gave way. With a final heave, the board came free, sending up a cloud of dust that made her cough. Rex whined and nudged her arm, urging her to look deeper. In the shallow space beneath the floorboard lay something wrapped carefully in oilcloth, the fabric still remarkably intact despite its age. Her hands trembled as she lifted the bundle, feeling its substantial weight. A lockbox, she whispered, carefully unwrapping the protective layers. The metal container was small but solid, its surface marked with spots of rust but otherwise well preserved by the oilcloth's protection. The lock had corroded over time, and with some careful manipulation, it crumbled away. Gianna held her breath as she lifted the lid, aware that she was about to uncover another piece of this increasingly personal mystery. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded velvet, lay a woman's gold wedding ring. Gianna lifted it carefully, turning it to catch the light streaming through the boards above. On the inside of the band, she could make out delicate engraving, H and J. Always. Hannah and James, their initials intertwined in an eternal circle that had never gotten the chance to fulfill its promise. Beneath where the ring had rested lay a photograph, its edges worn soft with handling. Gianna's heart skipped a beat as she studied the image. A young woman, beautiful despite her careworn expression, held a baby wrapped in a hand-knitted blanket. The woman's face was familiar somehow, like a ghost of features Gianna knew well. She gasped as recognition hit her. The baby's blanket, she'd seen that pattern before, draped over Mrs. Halberg's living room chair just yesterday. The woman's eyes, though younger and fuller of hope, held the same quiet dignity she saw in her elderly neighbor. Oh my God, Gianna breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Mrs. Halberg, she's Hannah's daughter. Rex sat beside her, his tail thumping slowly against the floor, as if confirming her discovery. The pieces fell into place with dizzying speed. Mrs. Halberg's careful avoidance of the past, her mother's endless vigils at the pier, the sadness that seemed to permeate her childhood memories. Gianna studied the photograph more closely. The baby couldn't have been more than 6 months old, likely conceived during those precious stolen moments between Hannah and James. Had he known? The dates in his journal suggested he might have disappeared before learning he was going to be a father. She thought of Mrs. Halberg's words about her mother's pain, understanding them in a new light. Hannah hadn't just lost her love, she'd raised their child alone, carrying the weight of their secret while watching their daughter grow into the very image of the man she'd lost. The sunlight had shifted, casting longer shadows across the boathouse floor, by the time Gianna carefully rewrapped the locked box's contents. Her mind was spinning with questions. How had Hannah managed in those early years? How had she explained the absent father to her curious child? What stories had she told to protect both her daughter and herself from the judgment of others? The walk home seemed to take forever, each step heavy with the weight of her discovery. Rex stayed close to her side, occasionally pressing against her leg as if lending her strength. The photograph felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket, its implications growing more profound with each passing moment. Back in her cottage, Gianna sank into her favorite armchair, finally allowing herself to feel the full impact of what she'd uncovered. She drew the photograph out again, studying every detail, the way Hannah cradled her baby, the subtle pride in her pose despite her circumstances, the hint of fear in her eyes that suggested she knew the challenges that lay ahead. Rex padded over and laid his head in her lap, his warm brown eyes fixed on her face. Gianna stroked his ears absently, her other hand still holding the photograph. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she whispered to him. "That's why you've been leading me through this story, because it's Mrs. Halberg's story too." The old dog sighed deeply, pressing his head more firmly against her leg. Outside, the sky had begun to darken, casting the room in soft twilight shadows. Gianna continued to stare at the photograph, her heart aching for both mother and child, for the weight of secrets carried across decades, for the questions that had gone unasked, for the answers that had remained hidden beneath rotting floorboards. How many times had Mrs. Halberg walked past that boathouse, never knowing it held such precious pieces of her own history? How many times had Hannah thought about retrieving these treasures, but couldn't bear to face them again? The photograph trembled slightly in Gianna's hands as she considered what to do with this knowledge. Rex's steady presence anchored her as she sat there, the evidence of a long-ago love story, and its lasting consequences, held carefully in her lap as evening settled around them. The morning dawned crisp and clear, but Gianna's heart felt heavy as lead. She stood on Mrs. Halberg's front porch, the photograph and ring clutched in her trembling hands. Rex sat quietly beside her, his presence giving her the courage to knock. Mrs. Halberg opened the door with her usual warm smile, though it faltered slightly when she saw Gianna's serious expression. "My dear, you look troubled. Come in for some tea?" "Actually, Mrs. Halberg," Gianna began, her voice soft but steady, "I need to show you something." She held out the photograph, watching as the elderly woman's face transformed from concern to shock. Mrs. Halberg's hands shook as she took the image. Where did you find this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "In a force lockbox, hidden in the old boathouse." Gianna pulled out the ring next, its gold surface catching the morning light. Along with this, the elderly woman staggered slightly, reaching for her doorframe. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, this isn't. My father never came back. He died in the war." "That's what Mother always said." Gianna stepped forward, wanting to steady her, but Mrs. Halberg backed away. "There are letters," Gianna said gently, "and a journal. Your father, James, he was here. He stayed in that boathouse for weeks, trying to find the courage to stop." Mrs. Halberg's voice cracked. "My father was a hero. He died serving his country." He wouldn't. Tears began streaming down her weathered cheeks. Gianna felt her own eyes welling up. The truth she'd uncovered wasn't just solving a mystery, it was unraveling the foundation of this woman's entire life story. "He loved your mother very much. The letters show that. But he was scared, confused about his loyalties." Lies. Mrs. Halberg's hands were shaking so badly now that the photograph fluttered to the ground. My mother waited at that pier every day for years. Every single day. She wouldn't have done that if. Rex whined softly, moving closer to Mrs. Halberg, but she stepped back from him too. Gianna watched helplessly as decades of carefully constructed beliefs crumbled before her eyes. He abandoned us? Mrs. Halberg's voice was small, childlike. He knew about me and still chose to disappear? The pain in her voice made Gianna wish she could take it all back, stuff the truth back into that buried lockbox. I'm so sorry. I thought you deserved to know, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe some secrets are better left get out. Mrs. Halberg's voice had turned to ice. She thrust the ring back at Gianna. Take these things and go. I don't want them. I don't want any of this. Please. Gianna reached out. Let me explain more about what I found. But Mrs. Halberg was already backing into her house. My mother died believing in him. Let me do the same. With that, she slammed the door shut, the sound echoing through the quiet morning air. Gianna stood frozen on the porch, tears rolling down her cheeks. The photograph lay at her feet, its edges curling slightly in the morning breeze. Rex pressed against her leg and whined again, softer this time, as if sharing her pain. Through the door, she could hear muffled sobs, and the sound broke her heart all over again. She bent down to retrieve the fallen photograph, her vision blurring with tears as she stared at the image of mother and child, their shared future still full of hope, unaware of the weight of secrets that would shape their lives. That evening, Gianna sat in her dimly lit cottage, surrounded by flickering candlelight. The soldiers' letters lay spread across her coffee table like fallen autumn leaves, each one telling a piece of a story that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Rex dozed nearby, his steady breathing a comforting presence in the quiet room. As she reread the letters, something shifted in her understanding. The words took on new meaning, not just expressions of love, but glimpses into a man's tortured soul. Between the lines of passionate declarations, she could now see the trembling hand of someone drowning in fear. His flowing script spoke of dreams and promises, but also revealed a spirit crushed by the weight of societal judgment and his own shame. Oh, she whispered, touching one tear-stained page. You didn't just abandon them, you couldn't bear the weight of your choices. The next morning, with renewed purpose, Gianna returned to Mrs. Halberg's house. The elderly woman answered her door reluctantly, eyes still red from crying. Please, Gianna said softly, let me share something I discovered. They sat in Mrs. Halberg's sunroom, morning light streaming through lace curtains. Gianna carefully explained what she'd found in the stair. Letters, how the soldier had written about his love for Mrs. Halberg's mother, his joy at learning about the baby, but also his paralyzing fear of facing a world that wouldn't accept them. He wasn't a hero, Gianna admitted gently, but he wasn't just a coward either. He was human, flawed and afraid. The love was real, Mrs. Halberg. The shame just proved stronger. Mrs. Halberg's hands trembled as she reached for one of the letters. Mother always said she saw love in his eyes, she whispered, her voice breaking. I suppose she wasn't wrong about that part. Tears began flowing down her cheeks, but these were different from yesterday's angry sobs. They were tears of acceptance, of finally understanding the complicated truth of her parents' story. They sat together in peaceful silence, hands clasped in shared understanding. Rex padded over and settled between them, laying his head across both their knees, as if binding their hearts together in healing. A soft breeze rustled through the pier's weathered planks as a small group gathered in the golden light of late afternoon. Gianna stood beside Mrs. Halberg, who clutched a simple wooden box decorated with seashells. Rex sat quietly at their feet, his eyes watching the waves. We're here to remember, Gianna began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, and to help heal an old wound. The old fisherman, Mr. Doran, who had once warned her about stirring up ghosts, stepped forward. My father told me pieces of this story. He said gruffly, we kept quiet because we thought it was kinder. Maybe silence isn't always kindness. Mrs. Halberg knelt carefully, placing the box containing her father's ring and letters into a specially prepared space beneath the pier's edge. For both my parents, she whispered, who loved in impossible times. Other townspeople began sharing stories, tales of wartime romances, of choices made under pressure, of forgiveness given and received. Gianna listened, feeling the warmth of acceptance wrap around her like a soft blanket. Here, among these people who understood that life's messiest stories deserved gentle handling, she found something she'd been missing since her marriage crumbled, a sense of belonging. The late afternoon sun painted the water in shades of gold as Rex padded to his familiar spot at the pier's end. This time, though, he settled down with a contented sigh, his eyes peaceful as he watched the horizon. His long wait was finally over. The waves lapped gently against the pilings, their rhythm a soothing lullaby from memories both bitter and sweet. A sharp knock at Gianna's cottage door startled her from her morning coffee. Rex lifted his head from his bed in the corner, ears perking with interest. When she opened the door, her heart skipped a beat. There stood Emily, her daughter, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Hi, Mom," Emily said softly, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I saw the article about the memorial in the Chronicle. About what you did for Mrs. Hallberg and the town." Gianna's hands trembled slightly as she held the door wider. "Would you like to come in?" The kitchen felt smaller with Emily there, both women carefully navigating around years of unspoken words. Rex padded over, breaking the tension by gently nudging Emily's hand. "He's beautiful," Emily said, kneeling to scratch behind his ears. "The article mentioned him too, how he led you to everything." "He chose me," Gianna explained, watching her daughter interact with the dog who had changed her life. "Would you like to walk with us? The beach is lovely this morning." They made their way down to the shore, Rex trotting ahead as waves crashed against the sand. The silence between mother and daughter slowly softened, like sea glass worn smooth by the tide. "I've been thinking," Emily began, stopping to pick up a shell. "About that soldier, how he let fear keep him from his family, how his daughter spent her whole life wondering." She turned the shell over in her hands. "I've been doing that too, Mom, wondering, being angry, missing you." Tears pricked at Gianna's eyes. "I know the divorce hurt you, sweetheart. I felt like I'd failed at everything, being a wife, being a mother. It seemed easier to just step back." "Like the soldier," Emily said quietly. "Yes," Gianna admitted. "But helping Mrs. Hallberg face her truth made me see something. Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't running away, it's staying present, even when it's messy, even when it hurts." They walked further down the beach, Rex occasionally circling back to check on them. Emily shared stories about her job, her apartment, the cat she'd adopted. Gianna listened hungrily, soaking in the details of her daughter's life she'd been missing. "Maybe," Emily suggested, "you could come visit sometime? Meet Sebastian, that's my cat. He's kind of grumpy, but I think he'd like you." "I'd love that," Gianna said, her heart swelling. "Art claimed by Wanan, and you're always welcome here. The cottage has a spare room." As the day stretched on, they made their way back toward town. Mrs. Hallberg was tending her garden and waved them over. "This must be your Emily," she said warmly. "I've heard so much about you." "Would you join us?" Gianna asked. "We're heading to the pier to watch the sunset." The four of them walked together, Mrs. Hallberg sharing stories about her mother's garden, Emily asking questions about the memorial, Rex leading the way with dignified purpose. The pier stretched before them, a bridge between past and present. They stood at the railing, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Rex settled at Gianna's feet, his vigilant eyes soft and content. Emily slipped her hand into her mother's, squeezing gently. Gianna looked at the faces around her, finding her daughter finding her way back. Mrs. Hallberg, at peace with her family's story. Rex, who had guided her to both truth and healing. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, but she no longer felt adrift. "We're all home now," she whispered, her words carried away by the evening breeze. "If even one moment stayed with you, hit subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story, written gently for the heart."